In part 1, I said something very uncomfortable, that remote work is not equal. It is structured power. Now, let me say something even more uncomfortable. In remote teams, authority is engineered, not granted, not gifted, not assumed. If you believe that your title automatically gives you influence in distributed systems, you are already losing signal. Because remote environment doesn't see your presence. No, they only see the structure you have built. If your influence disappears when cameras turn off, you never build structural authority. You build proximity influence. And remote exposed it. It exposed proximity influence. That includes me. I had led business teams in Nigeria. I had navigated fintech complexity. I had overseen multiple engineering squads. Then I entered regulatory environment, cross-national remote systems, and I almost overcapacitated myself into signal weakness. Not because I lack technical strength, no, but because remote systems don't reward effort. They reward signal architecture. Today, I will show you how exactly I recalibrated with real messages, real escalation, and real friction. This is not theory. This is operational survival. Let me start with Teams. When I was leading at PGG, Skype, which later became Team, was fast. It was high energy, rapid iteration, quick architectural back and forth discussions, short messages, immediate responses, speed signal competence. If you reply fast, you look sharp. If you move the conversation forward quickly, you look decisive. Yes, that environment rewarded responsiveness. And it worked because the systems were evolving quickly. And momentum was often more valuable than precision. But then, I moved into a regulatory multi-country engineering environment. Architectural discussions were different. There were more stakeholders, more downstream systems, more audit exposures, more integration layers, and something subtle changed. Teams stopped being a chat engine. It became archive. It became architectural memory. Every message wasn't just a suggestion. It became traceable reasoning. And I realized something very important. Team's message shaped perceived seniority when it comes to architectural discussion. How do people look at you? Look at your level. Team's message changed that. It doesn't change your title. It doesn't change your confidence in meetings. Your written structure. It was changed. Let me pause here. Do you care about global tech leadership, remote influence, building structural authority? Subscribe. Because this channel is about leverage, not noise. Now, let me show you something real. We were early in my career, when I moved to Europe, we were discussing whether to split a monolithic application, the foundation engine of it, into a separate banded services. And it was a serious architectural decision we have to make because it comes to keyway engine. There is latency implications. There is integration overhead to couple them back. There is test surface expansion once we do that. And then there is operational complexity that comes with supporting the system. Here's how I framed it initially in Teams. And I said, 18, maybe we should consider whether splitting the foundation engine might introduce some unnecessary overhead. Just thinking aloud. Polite? Yes. Collaborative? It appears so. Technically valid? Maybe. Structurally weak? Of course. Why? Maybe consider some, just thinking aloud, those 4 phrases, they diluted the architectural authority. It signals exploration, not direction for the team. In fast-moving environments, that might be fine. But in regulated multi-stakeholder systems, it reduces perceived weight of the communication. Then there is the shift I have to make to architectural framing. And here's how I reframe similar discussions later. I said, context. Validation engine currently enforces rule sequencing within single transactional boundary today. Then I move ahead. I said, this is the risk in it. Split introduces cross-service latency and distributed state coordination. That's number 2. Then number 3, I talk about impact. And I said, increased failure surface and non-deterministic validation ordering under load, when the load increases. That was number 3. And then finally I said, trade-off, modality gain versus transactional integrity risk. That's the trade-off we need to balance. Become more modular or maintain transactional integrity. There is a risk when we modularize. Now comes my recommendation. Maintain single boundary until validation ordering is formally abstracted. Notice what changed. No edging, no padding, no maybe, no casual language. Very formal, segmented reasoning. I clearly articulate the risk. Explicit trade-offs. Architecture is about constraints. Our constraints must sound deliberate. When I started framing architectural decisions like that, consistently, over time, something shifted. Fewer emotional objections. More structured counter-arguments. Cleaner decision logs. And most importantly, fewer instances of someone rephrasing my point more strongly and gaining the traction. Because now I present my point structurally, and make sure there is structure in what I'm presenting. And that is the key. Very important. And that is the reason why architectural framing matters more in remote. Because in physical rooms, architectural cadence can be carried by tone, by posture, by your demonstration, by the way you do. But remote strips all of that away. Now your architecture lives in bullet points, in structured arguments, message density, and traceable reasoning. In distributed system, architecture is not just technical design. It's actually much more than that. It is a narrative design. What story are you telling? If your architectural reasoning is unclear in writing, if people cannot follow your story, it becomes vulnerable. Yeah? Vulnerable to interpretation, to dilution, vulnerable to repackaging. And that's where many strong engineers lose influence. Not because they lack depth, but because their depth is not structured for remote consumption. And that is the psychological trap that many fall into. When operating across cultures, especially in global systems, there is a subtle pressure to sound collaborative, right? You two strong positions to avoid appearing rigid. So what do? You edge. You don't edge. Architecture requires clarity. And clarity is not aggression. Clarity is constraint making feasible. If your constraint framing is weak, your authority weakens. If your constraint framing is clear, your authority compounds. And that brings me to what I will call the core principle. And what is that principle? Team is not chat. It is a stage. Architectural discussion are not brainstorming threads. They are permanent reasoning trails that must be traceable. Every message becomes institutional memory when you are working in a remote setting. And in remote systems, clarity is equal to seniority. Structure is equal to authority. Ambiguity is equal to vulnerability. There is no neutral message. Every message is either increasing your signal or reducing it. Let me narrate a real moment. There was a database migration sequencing issue that involves an external partner that I was working with. Meetings kept looping. Some stakeholders, they wanted timeline to be preserved at all cost. And it's understandable. I could feel risk increasing. Now, here's the temptation. I could complain privately to them, or push other in meetings, or argue emotionally. No, I did none of that. Instead, I prepared a structured executive summary. Gave it the subject, migration sequencing risk assessment. And in my opening line, I said, current sequencing exposes rollback cascade under failure scenario, so. Impact, extended downtime, plus compliance traceability gap that may come up later. Then I went with, what are the options? Option A, maintain timeline, accept elevated risk. Option 2, delay by one sprint or so, and eliminate cascade risk. Option 3, partial migration, moderate exposure. I gave them those three options, and then I followed on with recommendation. Option B, based on risk-weighted stability model. Very structural, very structured in my response. That's it. Not more than that. No frustration, no reference to prior resistance, no ego. Within 24 hours, leadership who were pressing for time, they realigned. And here's the lesson there. Remote executives, they respond more to structured trade-offs. When you can structure your response, your trade-offs, in a way that it exposes, elevates the risk, you get the buy-in that you want. Not passion. No. Not volume. No. Not even repetition. Not padding. If you escalate emotionally, you reduce the signal. But if you escalate structurally, you increase institutional trust in you, and you win the battle. Operating across fast-paced fintech environments and regulated European systems requires something that I didn't initially expect. I didn't plan for. It requires recalibration. Not reinvention, recalibration. Because the same behaviors do not signal the same things in different systems. Yeah? In high-velocity fintech environment, speed is strength. Fast response signals engagement. Quick decision signals confidence. Immediate pushback signals very sharpness. Momentum is highly respected. If you hesitate too long, you look uncertain. If you delay, you look disengaged. So naturally, I carry that muscle memory with me. Then I enter into this environment, regulated, multi-country, compliance-heavy environment. And everything shifted. Something shifted. In those systems, speed is good, but it must be speed with structure, because speed without structure is signals impulsiveness. Immediate answers without visible trade-offs, analyzed, can signal under considered thinking. That is to say, the same behavior that have looked decisive in one environment for me or for anyone could look premature in another environment. I remember a specific architectural discussion. A proposal was raised to the social part of a validation pipeline. In a fast-paced environment, my instinct would have been immediate response. Yes, that works. Or, no, that creates risk. Immediately, I would have responded. But I stopped myself. Instead, I said, let me assess the trade-offs before committing. And I paused. Not because I didn't know what to say, the answer to give immediately, but because I understood something deeper. In mature regulated systems, visible reflection increases perceived weight. When people know that you are reflecting on what they say, that pause shifted perception. The room will lean towards me instead of moving on. The decision felt measured instead of reactive. And that was the moment I realized, cadence communicates seniority, not just content. There was another subtle calibration I had to learn. Silence. In some fast-paced environments, silence means disagreement. If someone goes quiet, tension is building. So you feel it quickly. You explain more. You reinforce. You push clarity further. But in certain distributed contexts, European context, silence often means people are processing your information. It means people are evaluating implications. It means trade-offs are being considered internally. Early on, I misread silence as resistance. And when I misread it, I reacted. I will fill the space. I will add context. I will add justification. I will add reinforcement. And without realizing it, I reduce my own signal weight. Because when you rush to fill silence, you signal discomfort. When you hold silence, you signal compulsion. Once I learned to let silence sit intentionally, meetings changed. I will state the constraint, I will pause. And then I will let it breathe. And once it's breathed, and the room will have enough time to process. Controlled pause signals authority. Uncontrolled speed signals insecurity. Cross-cultural leadership is not about changing who you are, but rather it's about calibrating how your signal is interpreted. Same intelligence, same technical depth, different cadence. Because different systems reward different rhythms. And if you don't recalibrate your rhythm, you misread resistance. You overcompensate. Yes, you will dilute your clarity. But when you manage cadence deliberately, your influence stabilizes. Cross-cultural leadership at its core is cadence management. And cadence is architecture. Here is something most engineers underestimate. Institutional memory in digital remote system. If it's not written, it didn't happen. There was a design discussion where consensus seemed clear. Weeks later, narrative drift. That drift began. Someone said, I thought we agreed to revisit this constraint, that constraint. That's when I realized memory without documentation is political vulnerability. After that, I made it a rule. Every significant meeting must get a recap. The subject of the meeting, migration strategy, design summary, what is agreed, sequencing constraints enforced, validation checkpoint inserted, what is delayed or deferred? Oh, performance tuning optimization will be done later. What are the open risks we carry? Open risk, external integration latency or something else, whatever it is. And then who are the owners of the actions? DevOps, freeze enforcement, keyword, validation script. Next review, Thursday, 2 p.m., Thursday days. That documentation become insulation. When drift happens, you reference structure, not emotion. Narrative control is not manipulation. It is a clarity preservation. Now, this part is personal because everything I've said so far about structure, cadence, and signal, none of it works if you don't master the internal layer. And for me, the internal layer was very uncomfortable. As an African leader operating inside global remote system, there is a pressure that doesn't always get spoken about, that people don't really talk much about. It's not loud, it's silent. It's not dramatic. As a matter of fact, it's not so energetic, but it's there. The pressure to overprove, to demonstrate competence constantly, to make sure every contribution is airtight, to anticipate every objection before it is raised, to avoid people misinterpreting you, to avoid misinterpretation, to show that you are collaborative, you are not aggressive, to be reasonable, to be balanced. And while some of that instinct is understandable, yeah, if it's unchecked, it will become signal distortion. There was a period where I caught myself over-explaining in architectural reviews. Not because I lack clarity, but because I wanted to remove every possible doubt before anyone could raise it. So, I will explain the context. Then, I will explain the constraint. Then, I will explain the historical background of how I reached the constraint, the context. Then, I will preempt people's objections and then soften the conclusion. By the time I finished, the clarity is diluted. I've been diluted already. Not because the logic was weak in the architecture, no. But because the signal was crowded with a lot of unnecessary information, a lot of padding. I almost over-explained myself into signal weakness. And that realization was very uncomfortable. Because it meant the friction wasn't only external, also within. It was internal calibration that I had to do. So I made 3 rules, deliberate rules, to manage my internal calibration. Not reactive adjustment. Rules that I want to play with. First, cut explanation by half or by 40%. The length of my explanation, I make sure I cut it by 40%. If I needed 3 minutes to explain something, I forced myself to do it in 2 minutes so that I don't have to overtalk. If I needed 10 sentences, I make sure I force it into 6 sentences. Not to remove depth, but to remove whatever noise may be in my communication. So that's number 1 thing I did. Second, remove edging language. I stopped saying maybe, I might be wrong, but no more. No more unnecessary cushioning before a clear risk statement. Say for what it is, not arrogance. Please take note of that. But precision. Then third, I never escalate without trade-off structure. No escalation based on frustration, no escalation based on repetition, or based on emotional fatigue. No. Every escalation must include 4 or 5 things. The risk, the impact, the options, and the recommendation. 4. I say it again. The risk, the impact, the options, and the recommendation. Every time I escalate, those 4 things must be included. If I couldn't articulate those 4 things clearly, it's not time to escalate. I need to do more digging. That discipline change everything. That discipline. Not overnight, definitely, but it happens steadily. Fewer reinterpretations begins to happen. Cleaner pushback. If I'm going to push back, it's very clean. More structured disagreement. And here's the important part. Bias did not magically disappear, but ambiguity did. And when ambiguity disappears, resistance becomes explicit. Explicit resistance can be addressed. It can be debated. It can be measured, resolved, as long as there is no bias in it. But implicit resistance is far more dangerous because it erodes authority quietly, because you are contending within yourself. No confrontation, no feedback, just gradual signal decay. The internal discipline layer is where real remote authority is built within yourself, not in the room, not on teams or in teams, but in how you regulate your own instinct to overcompensate, to over-explain. Because once your signals becomes clean, the system will respond differently. It will support you. And that shit is structural. In closing, I will say, remote work is not a level field. It is a signal field. Influence is proportional to clarity. Authority is proportional to uncertainty reduction. And narrative control determines long-term institutional memory. Are you able to control your narrative? If you want global influence, engine your communication. Don't shrink. Don't overcompensate. Don't become louder. No. Just become clearer. Because in distributed systems, signal is power. If your communication is structured, is calm, is documented, is risk-framed, I tell you, you will accumulate authority. But if it is emotional, vague, defensive, overextended, you will lose influence. And that quietly. And you know the most dangerous loss is the quiet one. Remote leadership is architecture. Build your signal deliberately.